many of you will have participated in public speaking training. And if you have participated in public speaking training, you must have heard about the Merhabian formula. Okay? Public speaking coaches are obsessed with this. It's all about your tone of voice and body language. This comes from studies and research conducted by Albert Merhabian in the 1970s. Merhabian usually disagrees with the type of interpretation that you will typically find on the internet, on the websites of public speaking coaches. Words only account for 7% of communication, tone of voice is 38%, and body language is 55%. Was Merhabian wrong? He was and he wasn't. The way he was interpreted and he gets quoted all the time is absolutely not accurate. But let's see what type of model we're operating under when we think that communication is more or less about the words that I'm using, my body language, the visuals, and my tone of voice. The elements here are mainly cognitive. Words, content, okay? I'm choosing my content and using words to deliver my content, so it's a cognitive thing. The tone of voice, well, tone of voice, according to Albert Merhabian, was intonation. Is what I'm saying a question? Is it a statement? It helps people understand where I'm going with what I'm saying, so it provides context for cognitive interpretation. And again, body language, which is used to express emotions, and those emotions are in turn used to make sure that the cognitive message gets across as intended. So the body language acts as a lubricant for the cognitive engine. If I'm saying, I drove my Lamborghini to work this morning, and my body language says no, according to Albert Merhabian, and he had a point, you will listen to my body language that says, no, I didn't drive my Lamborghini to work, I don't own a Lamborghini, right? So that's what my body language does, but it still provides cognitive cues you can use to interpret cognitive content. All of this model is very cognitive. But is communication a purely cognitive thing? If you ask me the Merhabian model, and I'm not talking about Albert Merhabian himself, but the model that was developed based on the studies he published by people other than himself. The Merhabian model is somewhat shallow because it focuses on the conscious aspects of communication, and it basically points out that if your tone of voice and body language are not in line with your verbal content, this will create a cognitive dissonance, and your listeners will mind your body language and tone more than they mind your words. Now, this is absolutely true. I will not question this. I will simply redefine what body language means and what tone of voice means. If you ask a public speaking coach, they will teach you to make sure that your body language is in line with your words. What they don't want you to do is to convey messages that are at odds with each other. So you have to keep your body language and tone of voice under control. Your cognitive, conscious mind has to control your tone of voice and body language. But are your tone of voice and body language something that pertain to the conscious mind? That's the huge question here. The conscious mind basically has to control the tone of voice and the body language, and the tone of voice and body language have to support the message, and communication occurs between two conscious minds. That's more or less the model here. There's no room here for unconscious elements. And there's no room here for timbre. Timbre is what the sound you are making consists of. It's the perceptual aspect of a voice you hear, of an instrument you hear, of a noise you hear. It tells you what that thing is made of, what that thing really is. There's no space for that in this model. If something goes wrong, your body language and tone of voice will interfere with the horizontal axis of communication between two cognitive minds and two conscious minds. So maybe there's unconscious contents there, but they are interfering with the communication that occurs between conscious minds.
Basically, what you're saying is that we need to delve deeper. We need to bear in mind the unconscious level of communication if we are to have a full picture of what this communication is about.
Well, I am saying this in a way, especially because the unconscious was discovered in Europe over 120 years ago. But in this particular communication model, model of human communication, we're maybe accepting that the unconscious is there, but we are either postulating that it simply sits there and does nothing in human communication, or that it might do something, but in the event that our unconscious intervenes, we have to sort of keep it down and repress it somewhere where it cannot disturb our communication. Well, if you go and check the neuroscience and the depth psychology that has been produced mainly in Europe over the last 100 years, you will realize that operating under this assumption is absolutely impossible. There are always huge unconscious dimensions when it comes to communication between human beings. Now we'll go back to my presentation here and introduce a notion that I particularly loved. It was introduced in the world of neuroscience by Antonio Damasio, who's a senior, very, very senior neuroscientist. In the 1990s, he proposed a different theory of decision-making. Why am I talking about decision-making here? Well, because the purpose of holding many meetings, especially at work, and the usual purpose of public speaking in general is to influence decision-making processes. If we model public speaking as a merely cognitive effort, we fail to understand how the art of leadership and convincing people and producing results at work, holding fruitful meetings work. I mean, all of this needs proper communication. Now, Antonio Damasio introduced a very interesting distinction between notions that usually get conflated: emotion, feeling, and perception. Emotional aspects are now very, very popular even in public speaking. Popular psychology has introduced the notion of emotional intelligence. Well, if you go and read the neuroscience, the picture is slightly different as usual. Popular psychology is one thing, but neuroscience is a far more complex environment. And what I love about Damasio's studies is that he introduces this distinction between emotion, feeling, and perception. Our body keeps on providing us cues that tell our nervous system how it is faring, if it is happy with what it is experiencing. Feelings owe their existence, feelings not emotions, owe their existence to the fact that the nervous system has direct contact with our insides and vice versa, our outsides. The nervous system literally touches the organism in the organism's interior, everywhere in that interior, and it is touched by that interior in return. Underneath the qualities and intensities that constitute the valuations expressed in feelings, do I like it or do I not like it? Their valences. There are molecules, receptors, and actions. In practice, there is little distance between feelings and the things felt. Somewhere in our brain and nervous system, what I see, what I hear, what I taste is the object itself. The reality I perceive happens inside of me at a feeling level, not a cognitive level, at the level of feeling. And again, feeling does not mean emotion here. Ownership knowledge can be obtained from overt and specific facts, the objective, so to say, objective world, but quite directly from homeostatic feelings, easily, naturally, and instantaneously. As often as needed, homeostatic feelings identify my mind with my body unequivocally. No extra reasoning or calculation needed. What does this mean? It means that we mainly have two sources of information on reality. The cognitive information we get that objectivizes things. I read this on a scientific paper. It must be true. Okay, I measured this, and it's 30 centimeters wide. Okay, and then I have access to feelings that provide a sense of knowing something without necessarily knowing why you know it. And that's not just psychological. That's the key message here. It's not just psychological, and I could be right, it could be wrong, and maybe it's just me, and so on and so forth. No, there's a neurological reality behind that. And Antonio Damasio is telling us that if we trust that, we have access to knowledge. And this is not New Age preaching. This is the result of decades of neuroscientific research. So, to sum it up, emotion is a reaction to what your nervous system is feeling through perception, sensory perception, hearing, seeing, touching, tasting. Feeling is the intermingling of sensory perception and the body's self-awareness. The sensory input mingles with the way my body is aware of itself. It's called interoception. Feeling controls our decision-making processes. If you go and read Damasio's books, this is pretty clear. And he's not the only neuroscientist pointing in that direction. Not emotions. Emotions are part of the game, but it's not just emotions. Emotions are reactions to that feeling. And so are decisions. And if you go on and read his papers and articles, you will find that the brainstem, here behind, a very, very ancient part of our brain, is where the intermingling happens. I'm mentioning this because it will come up later. Now, similar ideas were found in the writings of the fathers of psychoanalysis and depth psychology a few decades earlier. Of course, they did not have the means to test that, and they were psychoanalysts, not neuroscientists. Carl Gustav Jung, for instance, relies a lot on the notion of the subtle body, which he derived from ancient alchemy. He talks about the somatic unconscious, which he identifies, in his words back then, with the sympathetic nervous system. I think he was wrong, but he did not have access to the information we have now. It's a much larger portion of our nervous system, that is, the autonomic nervous system, the brainstem, and other parts of our brain that are not cognitive, again. And he made a distinction between feeling, emotion, perception, and intuition in 1921. So, hey, pretty ahead of his time. I have developed a different model of communication that I would like to propose today. It is based on a model typically utilized in the world of depth psychology, and it models the interaction between a therapist and a patient. Conscious to conscious, conscious to unconscious, unconscious to unconscious, in all possible directions. Now, if you adapt this model, consciousness has a psychological dimension and a somatic dimension. I can consciously control my body movements, okay? I can consciously decide that I will utter the next sentence. My unconscious here has a psychological dimension, yay, the stuff that I have repressed and so on, my traumas and so on and so forth, and not just that, a lot of positive stuff as well usually. And a somatic dimension. The somatic dimension having to do with the feelings described by Antonio Damasio in his work, and the way the body perceives itself all the time and interacts with the outside environment based on interoception. That's what we can call somatic unconscious. Now, if you add the communication aspect, the public speaking aspect to this model, you will have space for an element like timbre. These elements, words, rhythm, intonation, timbre, have both a conscious and an unconscious dimension. The unconscious dimension usually being much wider, much bigger than the conscious dimension. It's like an iceberg, basically. And All of these elements interact on different levels. Conscious to unconscious, conscious to conscious, unconscious to unconscious. So when you're talking to other people, your voice relays information on an unconscious to unconscious level, and communication happens between nervous systems, unbeknownst to your consciousness, but you can feel it. Now, was Mehrabian wrong? I would say he wasn't. His unconscious was right. Mehrabian's body language was facial expressions. He did not study gesticulation. He simply studied faces, smiling, frowning. That's all he studied. Okay. Interestingly, the muscles that control your facial expressions and your face also supply your middle ear. It's two different pairs of cranial nerves, and it's the fifth and the seventh. So there is an auditory dimension, if you will, to body language in Mehrabian's original model. At the same time, Mehrabian insisted a lot on tone of voice. His definition of tone of voice was intonation, but usually people provide very varying definitions. Prosody, intensity, how loud is your tone of voice, even rhythm or the emotions you put in your communication. Ask 10 different public speaking teachers and coaches. You will get 10 different definitions. Tone of voice means absolutely nothing. Or does it? I mean, I kept saying that it means nothing, and one day I was giving a lecture and arguing that tone of voice means nothing and we need to find a different definition, and it dawned on me. It's stuff I was already familiar with, but I had never made that connection. What has tone to do with voice? Is there something like tone to the human voice? Yes, there is, if you consider the neurophysiology of human voice. In order to produce your voice, you have to set in motion and in vibration lots of tiny little membranes, muscles, tendons, and they need to be activated and supplied with the correct nervous system tone to generate the correct tension. So all of that stuff needs nervous system toning, which means tone that comes from the vagus nerve, okay, vagal tone. Parasympathetic system, again, the autonomic system. Where is this all regulated and adjusted? The brainstem, again, where Antonio Damasio was taking us to, the place where feeling happens. So these are tiny little structures, mucous membranes, ligaments, muscles. Some of it you can move voluntarily, but most of it you cannot control voluntarily. And it is regulated and adjusted through your brainstem that is absolutely not cognitive. It can't speak any language. It cannot create PowerPoint presentations. That's not the language it speaks, so to say. So yes, there is something that has to do with tone in the voice, but it's not what we thought. Interestingly, when a voice is deprived of tone, when there's something disrupting the tone in a voice, things tend to go terribly wrong. Joe Biden. I published an article on my LinkedIn page a few weeks ago after the first presidential debate. Joe Biden lost his nomination on an evening where he appeared on the television, and his tone of voice, not his intonation, not his rhythm, not his pauses, not the emotions, not how loud he was. He had a microphone. They were both equally loud. But the tone in his nervous system was not correct. It was clearly not correct, and his voice was saying this. It was crying out loud, there's something wrong with my tone, nervous system tone. Now, Biden's supporters knew already that the man is a bit old and that he is a bit clumsy every now and again, but he was well prepared. I mean, he knew his stuff. I followed that debate. Only a couple of hours later, his supporters were withdrawing financial means from his campaign. Suddenly, the man was too old and somewhat sick. And that was the intrinsic nervous system tone in his voice. What has tone to do with the voice? Where can I hear the tone in a voice? Well, that's timbre. Timbre, again, is the fabric of a sound, in this particular case of a voice. and it carries the unconscious body language of the inner organs and the nervous system, their tone, their feeling. Again, not their emotions. It is the result of unspecific background tone. It manifests what we are on the inside, literally, not metaphorically. It literally tells other people what and how we are on the inside. It describes the quality of the way our voice moves, it stands, and how diversified its texture is. It is non-cognitive. It is connected with emotions, but it is not emotional per se. One thing that we need to bear in mind is that tone is generated in areas that are also responsible for arousal, vigilance, attention, wakefulness, alarm, and sensory gating. There are lots of tricks you can learn from an actor or from a public speaking coach about how to keep your audience awake and to style your message in a way that, hey, it will work. But there's nothing any of these people can teach you that will control your audience's attention. I mean, you can't make someone listen if their nervous system is going elsewhere. Okay? Tone, which you can hear in the timbre, if correctly generated, has that power. And it's not cognitive, it's not how good your acting skills are. What many people fail to understand is that the hearing system operates haptically. Our eardrums literally touch the hallmark left by sound waves in the air. So hearing is touching. When you hear me, you are touching my voice. You are touching the way my inner body is organized to produce it. Some of the things that I mentioned earlier on are beginning to make sense now. The way people produce their voice provides a lot of information on how near they are to you, on how they are treating their own body tissues, and therefore your own. How and what they are on the inside, and what it feels to be them. And you've got mirror neurons on your side, and you can instantly feel what it means to be that person. Timbre answers the question of who or what is asking the princess to marry her. Is it a real prince, or is it a frog in a suit? Incongruity, again, Merhabian was right. If there's incongruity between your body language and tone of voice and your message, people will follow the body language and the tone of voice. It happened during the debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. People followed his tone of voice and body language, inner body language, nervous system tone of voice, and no longer listened to what he had to say. Do we have studies corroborating what I'm saying? We definitely do have studies. Two particularly interesting pieces of research. One assessed the trustfulness and credibility of researchers. I mean, they had engineering science researchers hold a presentation on their research before an audience of peers, I mean other engineers and researchers. The control group was given the presentation in good quality audio. The test group was treated to the same presentation with a degraded audio, meaning the timbre had been manipulated and degraded. All other variables, intonation, accent, prosody, body language, and so on and so forth, were exactly the same. It was the same presentation in two different audio qualities. Guess what? The people who listened to the degraded audio version of the presentation assessed the quality of the research presented and the trustworthiness and credibility of the researcher much more poorly than the group of people who listened to the good quality sound presentation. So again, timbre making a huge difference. Another interesting piece of research assessed the outcomes in court during the pandemic. The people with the poorest audio connections consistently had worst outcomes in court. Again, a situation where a judge should provide an objective assessment of the elements, right? right? Well, no. Sound quality has a huge impact on the credibility of a witness or of someone who's making a statement.